we better prepare for that scenario. And that's what is paid off because U.S. Navy keep on talking about the Strait of Malacca being a choking point for the vital Chinese energy supply. And China's like, okay, we got to prepare for that. Let's build the Belt and Road Initiative. Let's build up ports all over the world so we are not dependent on one singular point of failure. This is also why China and Russia now is opening the polar Silk Road. They're piloting the maritime traffic through the Arctic region to reach Europe, which actually turns out a lot shorter distance than going around the Cape of Good Hope around Africa, like most of the shipping are doing right now because of the closure of the Red Sea. And so China has been preparing for an alternative world that's different from the unipolar moment dominated by the U.S. hegemon at the top.
大家好，这里是华人看世界 CNView 频道。今天我们关注一个耐人寻味的变化：特朗普突然宣布大幅缩减美韩联合军事演习，表面上说是不想向朝鲜释放错误信号，背后却可能是韩国拒绝参与对伊朗战争后的报复。与此同时，美军航母从太平洋调往中东。全球部署捉襟见肘，所谓重返亚太战略正在一步步失去支撑。美国还能否继续维持遍布全球的军事霸权？霍尔木兹海峡危机会不会成为美国的苏伊士时刻？面对制裁威胁、能源封锁和金融脱钩，中国为什么没有急于反击，反而提前多年布局石油储备、替代航线和新能源？本期节目，我们将听地缘政治分析师、丝绸与钢铁播客主持人 Carl Zha 深入解析美国为何陷入短视与混乱，东亚国家又将如何寻找新的安全出路，而一个不再依赖美国主导的多极世界正在怎样加速成型。
The assumption that China would take this opportunity to launch some sort of a surprise attack on Taiwan, this has more to say about the U.S. mentality and then the Chinese plan, because U.S. mentality has always been playing the zero-sum game and always use the military force to force a solution. Whereas China has been very patient. Their long-term strategic goal is still to integrate Taiwan back into their motherland, but they also realize that the regional stability is far more important, because if a war were to be fought in East Asia, it will be all the countries around it, including China, that will be affected. And this is something that none of these countries want, by the way. Nobody wants the war to visit their soil, to devastate their economy. And Chinese plan is such that their plan is to build themselves up until the gravitational pull of the Chinese economy and Chinese influence will naturally draw country toward it. This is what the Sun Tzu said, to fight, to win without a battle, that is the best of fighting a war. And that's the Chinese strategy. And so they're not going to make any military move just because of what United States does or does not do. China operate on their own schedule, right? Like Sun Tzu said, don't let your enemy set your battle plan. You fight the war on your own terms, at your own time, and place of your own choosing. That's what China has been doing. And China's focus right now is its own economy, to make sure, given the current Strait of Hormuz crisis, Chinese economy can still humming along. And they are doing a good job of that, because they have been stockpiling oil for 2 years prior the outbreak of the war. From 2024 and 2025, the world oil price has been at a relatively historically low level. The oil analysts actually find out that the world consumption of oil was less than the production of the oil worldwide. So everybody kind of expected a crashing of the oil prices, but that didn't happen. And it turns out because China has been buying a massive amount to store in their strategic oil reserve. And now those oil came in, this is the moment that China has been preparing for. In fact, they're better prepared than most other country in the world, because China has the largest strategic oil reserve in the world, larger than the rest of the countries combined. This is a classic buy low, sell high. So when the oil price now has risen, China has reduced its oil import by half, like more than 5.5 million barrels a day. In fact, that's what's saving the oil market right now. This is why the oil price has not gone to 125 or 150 barrels of oil, because China has cut back on its demand. And now people are asking, oh, no, why China do that? Why China, not putting the hurt on the United States by continuing to buy oil? But that's not how China thinks. China do not wake up in the morning and say, how I'm going to hurt the United States. China wake up in the morning thinking, okay, how can I make the day better for myself? And that's what they do. This involves long-term strategic planning, which is working out right now. And China is sitting pretty on a sea of oil, and they're also switching to other technology. Like China possesses the world's most advanced coal to oil technology, and which became profitable at $70 per barrel oil price. And now I think the current oil price is like 80 for the West Texas Intermediate and like 89 for Brent. So China will be fine. China will switch to converting coal to oil. China make most of its fertilizers from coal, and China also had a massive buildup of sustainable energy like wind, solar, and that's rapidly coming online. They also did a big drive toward EV and electrification of their high-speed rail. So China is all set. China, like this right now, China doesn't need to do anything. They can just sit back and manage the U.S. decline. On the one hand, China also don't want U.S. to collapse overnight, because that will create tremendous amount of chaos in the international system. So what China is trying to do is trying to make sure United States do not blow up the whole planet with it, and that is China's plan.
Yeah, the entire world looking at the US and going, okay, please don't blow up our entire planet, right? We are not ready for that. And yeah, I think you had a really good point there in the fact that China is focused on itself, and that is going to be really the end of the US empire, is this focus on everyone else. How can we create destruction and chaos? How can we hurt the key pillars of the multipolar world? They are so focused on that they're not looking inward at the ongoing collapse of the US empire. They just are looking outward at, are we hurting Russia and China and Iran and so forth and so on. And part of that, of course, goes into the Trump administration saying, oh, yeah, we'll have an indefinite naval blockade of the Strait of Hormuz, because they're hoping that not only will it hurt Iran and hit the global economy to a certain extent, but that it will hurt China. And I did think it was notable to kind of piggyback off of what you were saying. The Financial Times had a recent article where they basically admitted all of this. They said, look, for 2 decades, China's policymakers have been preoccupied with reducing the country's dependence on imported oil and gas and its consequent vulnerability to a naval blockade in any future conflict with the US. As a result, they say China's energy strategy has been vindicated by the US war on Iran. So when I look at this, I go, okay, the pivot to Asia was not a secret, right? The US becoming more and more hawkish towards China, the US cozying up to various countries, making them its vassal states, like you were talking about with their partnership, or I guess lording over South Korea, being like, hey, we are in charge of your military if anything happens. None of that has been done in secret. So are you surprised that the US hasn't been able to plan better on its end, that it hasn't taken a cue from China to realize, okay, this is how you actually grow versus this is how you just create endless death and destruction?
Rachel, Trump is ruling the country by watching the movement in the stock market. I don't think he understand about long-term planning. I mean, this has been the U.S. Corporate culture for a long-term time now. Now everybody watch the quarterly earning report. Screw what happens in 10 years. Nobody will still be in that leadership position in 10 years, right? There's election to be won. So everything is geared toward very short-term thinking. Whereas China, they have like 5-year plans. Now they're on like their 15th 5-year plans. Whereas China have this long-term planning, U.S. empire is definitely not. On the other hand, U.S. Navy has been talking about blockading China for decades. And China saw the signs. They said, oh, okay, so they plan to blockade us. We better prepare for that scenario. And that's what is paid off, because U.S. Navy keep on talking about the Strait of Malacca being a choking point for the vital Chinese energy supply. And China's like, okay, we got to prepare for that. Let's build the Belt and Road Initiative. Let's build up ports all over the world, so we are not dependent on one singular point of failure. This is also why China and Russia now is opening the polar Silk Road. They're piloting the maritime traffic through the Arctic region to reach Europe, which actually turns out a lot shorter distance than going around the Cape of Good Hope around Africa, like most of the shipping are doing right now because of the closure of the Red Sea. And so China has been preparing for an alternative world that's different from the unipolar moment dominated by the U.S. hegemon at the top. And a lot of that is in response for publicly stated aim of the U.S. military, for example, to choke off China's energy supply. So China has prepared for that, and their plans, as you mentioned, has paid off. This was basically this whole Strait of Hormuz crisis. You can think of it as a trial run for China for preparing for a U.S. blockade of Strait of Malacca. And it turns out China will be okay. Not sure about United States, though.
Yeah, the U.S. seems to think that it's going to go into this. I mean, apparently Trump has decided that the Strait of Hormuz is going to be a U.S. territory now. So speaking of not really having any planning, you look at China, and exactly as you said, it's like, oh no, they've been planning for this for a while. And
这期节目表面上讨论的是美国缩减美韩联合军事演习以及美军航母从亚太调往中东的最新动向。但如果把这些事件放在一起观察，就会发现真正值得关注的并不是某一次演习取消，也不是某一艘军舰去了哪里，而是一个曾经试图维持全球霸权的国家，正在越来越明显地暴露出资源不足、战略失衡和信用透支的问题。特朗普把削减美韩军演解释为不想向朝鲜释放错误信号，但节目嘉宾认为真正的原因很可能是韩国拒绝参与美国对伊朗的军事行动。这种做法的危险之处在于，它把原本属于联盟体系的安全合作变成了服从与惩罚的交易，愿意听从美国就被称为伙伴，拒绝参与一场自己不认可的战争，就可能遭到军事、经济乃至外交上的报复。可是联盟最核心的价值恰恰应该是稳定、可预期和相互信任。如果军事演习可以因为政治分歧随时被取消，那么盟友就不得不重新思考，美国提供的究竟是可靠的安全保障，还是一种附带条件的保护。如果驻扎在本国的外国基地不仅不能避免冲突，反而可能让自己成为对手打击的目标，那么这些基地究竟是资产还是负担？美军航母长期超负荷部署，也说明全球霸权并不是一句口号就能维持的。账面上拥有多少航母、多少基地、多少盟友，并不等于能够同时处理所有危机。中东局势持续升温之后，美国不得不把亚太资源抽调过去，甚至让已经长期在海上执行任务的军舰继续承担压力，所谓全球存在。最终还是要落到人员、舰船、弹药、补给和财政这些具体资源上。一旦资源无法覆盖所有方向，战略承诺就会开始出现裂缝。霍尔木兹海峡危机之所以具有象征意义，是因为它让许多国家看到了美国力量的边界。美国可以宣布封锁，可以实施制裁，也可以要求其他国家选边站队，但他未必有能力按照自己的意愿控制每一条航道，更不可能永远要求全世界为他的战略选择买单。过去许多国家接受美国的安全体系，是因为相信美国能够提供保护。如今当战争风险和经济代价不断转嫁给这些国家时，他们自然会开始寻找新的选择。节目中反复提到的另一个重点是中国面对危机时所采取的长期准备。无论人们是否认同这种战略，都不能忽视其中的现实逻辑。提前储备能源，分散进口路线，推动铁路、电力和新能源建设，发展替代性的贸易通道。 都是为了降低对单一海上节点和单一金融体系的依赖。这样的准备在平时可能不够醒目，但到了危机时刻，差别就会被迅速放大。这也解释了为什么中国没有选择通过不断推高油价来打击美国，而是优先保障自身经济的稳定。真正成熟的战略不一定是每一次都急于反击，也不一定要把对手的损失当作自己的唯一目标。更重要的是，能不能保持自己的发展节奏，能不能让国内产业继续运转，能不能在外部环境恶化时减少脆弱点。对于一个大国来说，稳定本身就是一种力量，耐心本身也是一种战略资源。与之相对的是美国政治越来越明显的短期化倾向。政府要看股市，企业要看季度财报，政客要看下一次选举。很多决策都围绕眼前的舆论和利益展开，长期规划需要承担成本，也需要面对短期内看不到回报的阶段。但如果一个国家只愿意追求即时成果，就很容易把未来的风险不断推迟，直到问题集中爆发。刺激制裁尤其体现了这种矛盾。美国试图通过金融体系和美元网络，把自己的法律意志扩展到世界各地，要求其他国家不仅不能和伊朗、俄罗斯做生意，甚至不能与相关企业发生往来。短期来看，这种做法确实可能制造压力，但从长期来看，它也会迫使越来越多国家寻找替代结算方式、替代金融渠道和替代供应链。当制裁被使用的越来越频繁，美元体系的便利性就可能逐渐转化为政治风险，世界各国也会更加认真地考虑如何降低这种风险。这并不意味着美国会立刻崩溃，也不意味着未来一定会按照某一种预设剧本发展。大国衰落从来不是一夜之间完成的，国际秩序的变化也不会一帆风顺。美国仍然拥有强大的军事、科技、金融和文化影响力，但问题在于实力是否还能转化为信任，优势是否还能转化为合作。当一个国家越来越依赖威胁、制裁和强迫，而不是依靠自身的发展吸引伙伴，它失去的就不仅是某一个盟友，而是整个体系的说服力。真正的多极化也并不是简单的把一个霸权换成另一个霸权，而是让更多国家拥有选择的空间，拥有不必被迫选边的权利。未来的世界可能更加复杂，也可能更加动荡，但各国正在努力建立多元的能源、贸易、金融和安全网络，这一趋势已经很难被轻易逆转。对于普通人来说，我们需要保持警惕，也需要避免被任何一方的宣传牵着走。看国际新闻，不能只看谁赢了谁输了，更要看谁在为未来准备，谁在透支过去积累的信用，谁在把本国的风险转嫁给别人。这期节目的核心启示或许就是一句话：真正决定一个国家未来的，不是它能在一时之间发出多大的声音，而是它能否在长期竞争中保持理性、稳定和持续发展的能力。战争可以制造短暂的声势，制裁可以带来片刻的压力，但只有产业、能源、科技、金融和人民生活才是支撑国家走得更远的根基。对于美国接下来会不会继续扩大制裁，对亚太盟友的承诺是否还值得相信？中国又会如何按照自己的节奏应对变化？欢迎大家在评论区留下看法，也欢迎把这期视频分享给更多关心国际局势的朋友。别忘了点赞订阅，继续关注后续精彩内容。